So I did a video on Norway's close connections with Britain in the middle of the 20th century, but during World War I they also had close connections with Britain and were forced to become a sort of neutral ally in a way and stop trading with Germany. But Sweden had quite close relations with Germany. Gustav V had married a German, and prominent people like Ludwig Douglas and Sven Hedin were Germanophiles. Now, this could be because of old cultural connections and trade, but it's probably more likely as a result of their mutual enemy, Russia. Sweden and Russia had fought multiple wars against each other throughout history, and the most recent one was in 1808, where Russia took Finland. But in the early 20th century, there was a bit of a culture war going on in Finland, where Swedish speakers and Finnish speakers were trying to vie for dominance within courts and schools. So many Swedish people saw Finland as just lost Swedish territory and hoped to reclaim it. And after all, their relations with Britain weren't exactly great, because in the early 20th century, hundreds of Swedes went off to go fight for the Boers in South Africa. So in 1910 they met with the Germans. Joint Chiefs of Staff proposed a joint war against Russia and taking St. Petersburg, but Knut Bind had trained in Germany, and he stopped this because he said that if the Germans were to be allowed into Sweden, they couldn't resist but annexing land there as well. Well, all Scandinavian nations were a little bit suspicious about Britain and Germany, but they did depend on trade with both nations, so this is why they remained neutral. However, they did draw up defensive operation plans. However, this didn't stop the Germans from trying to get the Swedish involved during World War I, and even if it failed, the possibility of Swedish involvement would have kept Russian troops stationed in the north, and it could well have also inspired Finnish people to rise up against the Russians. So Zimmermann made some pretty bold plans. He offered Sweden the Russian Baltic and Finland, and this was met with some excitement in Sweden, particularly amongst the nobility and the Germanophiles, but ultimately the government rejected the plans. But there was some movement in 1918 after Finland declared independence and a civil war broke out. So thousands of Swedish people went to go volunteer to fight against the Finnish communists, and in February 1918 the Swedes took Ireland, and they could well have expanded a little bit, but a month later the Germans moved in, and after World War I it was returned to Finland. So the Swedes ultimately remained neutral during World War I, and they remained neutral during World War II as well. But thousands of Swedes went to go fight for the Finnish against the Russians in the Winter War. And during the war itself, they were in a bit of a volatile position, because they became a refuge for people fighting against the Nazis, and also allowed the Nazis to march through Sweden. Plus, like with most nations, many volunteered to join the SS. However, the Swedish could well have been dragged into the war very early on because of Plan R4. Now, relations were already quite bad between the Allies and Sweden, and that's because during the Winter War, the Allies had hoped to send troops to the Finnish front, but Norway and Sweden refused to let them pass through. Plan R4 was essentially just mining Norwegian and Swedish waters, forcing the Germans to travel outside of their neutral waters and then could be targeted by British ships. And this would hopefully stop Swedish iron ore travelling over to Germany and helping produce weapons. The Allies then expected that the Germans would respond by invading Norway, but they hoped that they could send in troops to Norway quickly, secure Norway, and then close off the Swedish railway lines and cut off the iron ore trade to Germany. But the German invasion of France soon put an end to these plans, and Swedish iron ore continued going to Germany.